Hello, John Talley here with Partzilla.com, and sitting over here in front of me on my bench is a 2018 Honda Grom, completely stock with only 2 miles on it. Now what are we going to do with this little machine? We're going to do a series of modifications to make it run faster, handle better, and look better. There basically won't be hardly any nut or bolt on this thing that we're not going to touch in that effort. Now we're going to start off this project with a rear fender eliminator kit. Then we're going to do something about what I call foot pegs, and they actually call a rear set. After that, we'll address the lighting on it a little bit, upgrade the clutch and the brake system along with the handles. Then we're going to dive into the suspension, and when all of that's finished, we're going to go into the engine, punch it out to 170 cc's, use a 4-valve kit as well as an intake and throttle body. Now to tie it all together, we're going to go to DYNOJET and install one of their systems so we can get the correct air fuel mixture going into that new engine. Now you put all of those modifications together and that's going to add up to a really fun to ride machine. Now there will be some special tools that's going to be required as we go through these various modifications. Now I'm going to call those out as we go along with any other hand tools that you may need to get this project done. Now if you'll check the link in the description below, there's going to be a long list that shows all the parts and especially all the special tools that we use to get this project accomplished, and they are available on Partzilla.com. Partzilla.com is the premier supplier of both factory OEM and aftermarket parts in the power sports industry, and that allows us to buy deep and then offer discounts up to 80% off. So come check us out, and if you can't find what you're looking for, get in touch with us. That is what we're here for, is to make your life easier and get your machine running the best that it can. Now this is going to be a fun little machine, and I can't wait to ride it when we're actually done with it. So without further ado, let's jump into this project. The Fender Eliminator kit that I chose is one from Yoshimura. It is a really high quality unit and it should be very easy to install. They even included a light for your tag, and we're going to install this with just basic hand tools. So let's start by getting the seat out of the way. Now here's the game plan. The 4 bolts that we're after are here, 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 and here. They're all 12 millimeter. But before we remove those, we want to disconnect the sub harness that's going to the rear fender. So just follow it to its connection point right here. You can actually lift it up far enough to disconnect it. We'll just feed it back, taking notice of how it was routed in any wire holders, because we want to put it back from whence it came. So now that it's disconnected, we can go ahead and get those 4 bolts out of the way, and then the whole back end will release. I think there's one little clip up top you have to get past, but then it'll drop down. And that clip I refer to is right here, dead center. I'm just going to push it back just a tick. There we go. And she's free. It already looks better. So what we're going to do next is go ahead and take off this lower pan. That's going to give us access to the bolts and the wiring that are down below, because we're actually going to reuse these temporarily, because later and we're going to replace the turn signals front and back as well as the rear view mirrors. Right now I'm going to go ahead and reuse them so you know how to put it back together. There we go. Now that we have access, it's really easy to get to the wiring. Now keep in mind which color wires go where as far as your right and your left. Let's keep up with that orange one. That needs to be on our left. Next, we just need to get down to these 2 14 millimeter bolts that are holding on our turn signals. So the way to break this one loose is to actually pass your wires up under this metal hoop. Go and run it through your wrench. Then get it in there and get it loose. Now we're going to cut this a couple inches from the end. So that should be more than enough to make a connection to the new light. Now, with all that out of the way, we can actually start putting this back together. And the way we're going to approach this is go ahead and build up the entire assembly before we go install it. So you'll have the tag bracket that goes here, but it's also integrated in with the two side pieces that hold your left and rear turn signals. So once we get all of that put together, then it'll just slide up here, get bolted into place, and then we can make our electrical connections. Now we start with the rear tail light, and you want to make sure that you actually feed it through this hole in the right orientation, because this is cut so close it doesn't want to let you turn it. So we want to make sure that it goes in the right orientation. Now we're going to attach it with these two 4mm thread hex bolts, and I believe they actually have a 2.5mm hex that you're going to need to drive it in there. You'll notice each and every piece on this kit has a really good fit and finish to it. I mean, most of your cheaper kits, they just have plastic that you probably screw it into. No, not this one. They actually have brass threads embedded in the light itself. It's a really nice kit. All right, next, let's go ahead and get together our turn signal brackets as well as our tag bracket. And we don't have the tag yet, but we'll install it later. So we're going to put it together just with the bracket for the time being, or that outer trim plate, if you will, and you want to orient it like this. So let's go and get that bottom half on, and then we'll concentrate on the top. Then go for the other side. Let's go ahead and tighten these down. This is just a 4mm with a 10mm nut. Now, I am actually going to install the OEM equipment back onto this, but like I said, we're going to replace these at a later date. But to do this, if you are going to reuse your stock ones, take this plate off. And if you remember a little while ago, I said we wanted the left side to be the orange, so this is going to be our right. And actually, this plate is notched out for the stock setup. Now, before we actually mount this to the machine, let's go and route our wires up in the general direction as we did with our tail light. Now it's ready to go. There is one small adjustment that we need to make so we can get this bracket to go up in there. The rear brake light needs to get unbolted and just pushed out a little bit where we have enough clearance to get this edge up behind it. A couple of 10mm. We don't have to disconnect it. We're just going to take it off its mount just by a little bit. Feed these wires up through the center. And then we're going to take these two tabs, and they'll actually go to the bottom of the seat pan, to these two slots. As you pull the wires up through, just lean the tail light up out of the way, and up she goes. Next, we take our 5mm head bolts and run them up from the bottom and get our nuts on the other side. We'll go ahead and get all four in place and just get them in there finger tight. Then we'll go back and tighten them down. So I'm going to warn you right here, if you drop this bolt, there's a chance it'll go inside the frame. Not that I've ever done that before. Everybody's in place. Let's go ahead and get them tightened down. And with all that in place, put your 10mm back for the brake light, and then all we have left after that is just the electrical. Get our sub harness back in. No harm in reconnecting it as long as you don't turn the key back on. So the turn signals are really simple. Just plug them back in. It's all color to color. Keep in mind that the green actually has 2 points, one for either side. Green to green, blue to blue. Do make sure they snap in all the way when you're pushing them in. Another green to green, then orange to orange. Now when we're done, we'll tuck this all up under this edge over here, put a couple of zip ties to hold it in place. Now our tag light. We want to cut back the sheathing that's actually protecting it. When you do this, try not to nick the wires because that will give corrosion a place to go in, and we don't want that. We just want to cut that outer casing. There we go, like that. See, no nicks. Let's strip our wires back. A little over 1/4 inch will be enough. Next, let's go ahead and feed the wire all the way through the connector. Then we're actually going to twist these together like that. Bring over our connector. You get that center section right in the middle of that connection and just put a light crimp on it like that. Same thing for the other wire. So when you make this crimp, that's really not connecting it yet. That's just getting it in contact. So what we're going to do next is heat it up, and that's actually going to fuse the two wires together. See the solder melt in there? Starting to go into the individual strands of the wire. Yeah, they're soldered together now. Cool little connectors that they sent with this. Now we just have a little bit of housekeeping to do. We'll put all those connections up under this cover. Then we're just going to route it over to go under this edge like so. I doubt that's going to fly anywhere, but just for the heck of it, let's pull it out just a little bit and get one zip tie around it under the existing harness. Now get tucked back up under there. Well, guess what, guys? This one is complete. Next up, we're going to dive into, well, what they call the rear set and what I call the foot pegs. So let me go grab the parts and we'll get started on it. It's a complete kit from Driven. There is only one additional part that you're going to need to order because this actually eliminates that pull switch that activates your brake light. You're going to need to get a hydraulic type switch. Now, as far as the special tools go, well, there aren't any, but there's one thing that you're going to need to pick up, and that is some blue Loctite, because we're talking about control points here, so it all needs to stay together. Very important. Well, now that we've got our parts together, let's get over to the machine and get this thing done. The game plan here, we're going to start over on the left side. First, we need to get the shift mechanism removed from the actual input shaft for the shifting. Then we are going to put the jack under it and just lift the weight off of it, because what's going to happen when we remove these two bolts, the bottom one, no big deal. This top one, it actually goes through the swing arm all the way to the other side and through the engine. So we need to support all this so it doesn't collapse. So let's go ahead, reach in and get that shifter off. It's just a 10 millimeter. We'll leave it in place and then it should come away and come off the shaft when we remove this outer plate. This is a 12 millimeter. A 14 on this side. That'll actually stay in place. And the other side has a 19. Next, let's put some support under it. You don't have to lift it, just support the weight. Now to keep things, well, loosely together, we're just going to use a steel rod. This is roughly a 1/2 inch. We're going to use that to push through and more or less hold the bike together. So we're starting to push through. Let's go ahead and pull it off the shift. There we go. Piece of cake. There's a little bit more going on this side, obviously, but let's start by getting the exhaust bracket out of the way. Of course, we will be replacing the exhaust, so I'm not so worried about the lack of a mount for it on this particular setup. Just another 12 down low. Drive that in a little bit further. Now, with those two out of the way, now we can at least bring it out and lift it up. That way we can access our linkages, and get all this unplugged. Just a whole lot easier than trying to work on it with it still attached to the machine. Let's start by getting this cotter pin out of the way. That pin won't push through unless I get the body unbolted. So we can get that pin to spin around and clear. Don't give you much clearance there, but it will come out. Next, we just need to follow our brake light wires up to a clamp. Let's see if we can get that to pull loose. There we go. Everything's pulled apart, but before we can start putting it together, we need to make a decision as to where we want our foot pegs to be. Because as you can see, they had multiple locations. I'm going to pull it back to the 5 location on both sides. So let's get one of our pegs. We're going to go ahead and put some blue Loctite on the threads. Once I get it positioned, then we're going to torque it to 29 foot-pounds. Let's take a peek and see if we've got it level. I'm using the Driven TT Racing as my level point. That's it. Let's do it again. Now the cool part with these, the reason they do this, well, depending on how big your foot is and what angle you like to engage with the shifter and or brake, that's why they have all these adjustment points. Really nice setup that they came up with. Yep, that's it. So let's go ahead and remove this cotter pin and get this ready to attach to our new shift arm. You could probably do this on the bike. I prefer just to remove the whole thing and work at it with it pointing toward me. Now we're going to set this up in the standard shift or regular shift configuration where it's attached at this point at the bottom. That's what we're after. If you wanted a reverse shift pattern, I don't know why you would, but you can actually move it over to up here and it'll actually shift in reverse of what you're used to. To each their own. I'm going to go with the standard on this. The one thing you need to make sure of is the distance here. If you're going to do standard, this needs to be 2.6 inches. If you're going to move it up to the reverse, it needs to be extended out to 2.8. So 2.6 inches is actually 66 millimeters, and that's from the center of the eyes. So let's check and see where it is. And hey, if we get it up there and it's just a little too high or too low, break these loose and adjust it where it feels right for you. So now on this side, the 2 spacers that we're going to use is out of the larger diameter is the thinner one, and the thinner one for the smaller diameter. And they're actually going to go here and here. Let's go ahead and get our swing arm bolt and just let this guide it through. We have to jiggle it around to get it to line back up. Now, take one of the M8 bolts. We can get a little bit of blue Loctite on it. Don't forget your spacer. Go ahead and put our bolt back in on the shift shaft. Now, our bolt through the turnbuckle and the spacer. Now through the shaft and bolt on the other side with Loctite. Very important. That's a little bit on the aggressive side as far as down. If you need to bring it in closer, break those loose and then bring it in. But I kind of like that angle. So I think I'm going to leave it in that position. So we've got this side pretty much ready to go. Let's head over to the other side and start getting it put together. The first thing we want to do on this side is go ahead and get the master cylinder reattached to this point. Let's start by getting this clevis pin in. With the clevis pin in, go ahead and bring up your bracket. Don't forget to add in this bracket because it acts as a spacer as well as an attachment point for the exhaust system. Get our nut on. Just do it hand tight for right now. Go ahead and put our cotter pin through. Let's go ahead and get those 2 tightened down. Now let's bring it around with our spacers. Lock tight on the bottom one. Don't have to put it on the top because it has a locking type nut that goes on it. So now we need to torque this main bolt to 54 foot-pounds. Now hopefully if I do this smooth enough, that ratchet will stay on the other side. There we go. Little Loctite on the bolt for the exhaust. I'm just going to reuse the factory bolt. Now keep in mind we're going to be replacing this later, but if we were doing the final install, you would need to put Loctite on it. So this actually completes the installation of the kit itself, but I still want the rear brake light to work. So we're going to add in this switch, and all it'll do is just replace this banjo bolt. It's just a 12mm. And once you break this loose, air gets in and you have to bleed it. Otherwise they are not going to function properly. And no, you can't just pull it apart and put it back together. It doesn't work that way. Once you open up a system like this, you got to straighten it out. That should do it. Now, before we can actually bleed the system, we have to gain access to the rear brake master cylinder reservoir. And to do it, it's a little bit invasive. You actually have to unbolt the rear tail section, swing it up out of the way, and there are several bolts and a couple of different plastic rivets that you have to remove to get the front shroud off. Now, with all these panels off, we can actually bleed it. But before we can even do that, we have to move the reservoir temporarily to right here. Now you can access both of those screws to get the reservoir cap off. What we're doing now is just bleeding the brakes, pumping it up. I'm opening up the valve and then pushing it through. And shortly it should push that air all the way through the hose and then out through this bleeding valve. Don't let it fall below, otherwise you're just going to induce air up here and you pretty much have to start all over again. So yeah, there's no way to do this without accessing this. It's just too much. It has to be forced through to get the air through. So pumps, set our level. That's actually right at it. So I think we're done. Now we can go ahead and get our cap back on. Move that bolt. And since we're right here with that connection for the switch, let's go ahead and make it. Here's our connection point. That will be tough to do without removing all this. Brown to black, green to green. Now, let's get our reservoir back in place. All right guys, that pretty much wraps this one up. Only thing I have to do now is just reinstall all these panels. Well, next up, we're going to focus in on the clutch system on this machine. And while we're in there, we're going to go ahead and upgrade to a high flow oil pump. But there's also a few other parts that we're going to need to pull this off. Now once again, we went to Coso North for the majority of our parts. We've got the clutch kit, and we're also installing a lifter. Here's our oil pump. Now in addition to that, there's a couple other pieces that you're going to need that are OEM. You're going to need a gasket for that cover, and then the bearing that actually goes inside of this lift plate. Now, as far as the special tools, here they are. First one I want to talk about is this adapter that's going to pull two different nuts. One that holds the main nut for the clutch, and the other one's for what they call the old spinner. This one part will actually do both of those. The other thing that you're going to need is something to hold the gears still. Now, Honda makes one for this process. Just have that in the gears when they come together. That's going to hold everything still and not damage the gears. We're going to start this process by laying in our fiber plates, and we're just going to pour a quart of oil so they can soak while we're pulling the rest of the machine apart. Now, I'm just using standard GN4 oil. Nothing special. We just don't want to put the plates in dry, because if we do that, there's a chance that they'll never pick up the oil and immediately start tearing themselves apart. Let's put that to the side. Next, we're going to go ahead and drop the oil out of the machine. You just need a 17mm to do that. The bolt you're looking for is right here. Now we probably could have used the oil out of it to soak our plates, because this machine has, I think, 2 miles on it. Yep, it looks brand new. So we've got our plates soaking, all the oil's drained out. Let's go ahead and reinstall our drain plug. Now let's go ahead and get our brake lever out of the way, and instead of removing the entire bracket, we're just going to remove the pivot point right here, and that should allow it to drop down far enough to clear the case. Now let's go for this bracket up top that holds the clutch cable. So we should just be able to remove the bracket while it's still mounted to the cable, and then release it from the clutch arm. There she goes. Now, what Honda wants you to do is actually just remove the other bolts in a crisscross pattern. They're all loose. Now we're just going to buzz them out. Now when we pull this cover, it's going to drool some oil onto the exhaust system, and I'm not really worried about that at the moment because we are going to be replacing it. But if you were not, it'd be a good idea to cover it up so you don't have so much of a mess to clean up later. And all these bolts, they all look to be the same length. But before you pull the cover, make sure you remove the dipstick, otherwise it's going to get caught on that centrifugal filter. Next, let's get off this cover. To make this a little bit easier, they actually make a special tool to go in the gearing here to hold all of this still. And that's not absolutely necessary. It just sits in there like this. You could actually use just a piece of aluminum, let the gears bind down on it. Just make sure you remove it when you put it back together. Now, if these weren't Loctited, that wouldn't be a big deal, just breaking it loose. But yeah, I'm having to put a fair amount of effort, and it'd be really tough to hold this still with your hands. So to pull this off, you'll need a Honda special tool to actually get in there and grab that particular bolt. Lay everything out in the same sequence that it comes out. We'll definitely need to clean this up before we put it back together. Tell you what, let's go ahead and get the gasket off. Oh, and for once, Honda used a gasket that you could actually remove. Those greenish type gaskets are so well made. They're extremely difficult to get off. That's usually the most arduous part of this, is getting all the residual, like right here, pulled off. And this one has come off rather smoothly. Now with that plate down, let's reach in and remove this bearing. Hopefully it'll come out smoothly. So with the bearing out of the way, it is time to go ahead and release that inner bolt. I've seen them come apart with just, holding the gears still, but sometimes those springs aren't quite tight enough to hold everything still to get that bolt to release. So this is one of the few times I'll use an impact. I don't really mind using them to take something apart. I never use them to put something together. With that off, we're going to take out this outer plate, and want to do that a couple of turns at a time as to not damage the bolts and or the threads they're going into on the inner part of the clutch. Now the reason we're doing all this is increasing the displacement and the airflow in the head, and doing programming and different throttle body, and it's just going to put too much stress on the factory clutch. By going with the COSO unit, it should be able to deal with the additional torque and the horsepower that this thing's going to develop. Because you can look at the diameter of the stock springs versus the COSO springs. You can visually see the difference, and you can also feel the difference. I can just about compress that one all the way just with my fingers, and I can maybe get the COSO unit halfway. So that's going to put a lot more pressure onto the plates that's going to allow them to hold together better. Now, here's where it's important to mark how things come apart, because we want this part to be in the same orientation with the back. Now, what I think we'll do here is just pull off the whole assembly, because putting it back together, it'll be easier to do that on the table and then just bring it up. There we go. Pull out your washer. Once again, lay things out as you're taking them apart. Makes it a whole lot easier to put back together when you're done. I'm going to go ahead and lift out the clutch pack as an assembly, pretty much one piece. Just lay this to the side. Now here's the part I wanted to show you. When you go to put this back together, we hit it like this. Let's go one off. See that? It will not engage and go all the way down. It has to go as it was taken apart, like that. Because if you don't do that correctly, it's not going to put any pressure on the plates, and you're just going to burn up a brand new clutch. So make sure you match this up. And if you forget to match it, well, just keep going step by step by step up until you can get it to go back in. and that's right there. So important little tip there, otherwise you're never going to get this to work right. When you're putting this back together, make sure this washer doesn't get left out. And now we can start stacking our clutch back together. So I know on some of the older Groms you actually had different fiber discs that had to go in a certain order as you were coming out. On this particular kit from Koso, all the fibers are the same, so it doesn't matter how they are stacked. And the best you can, eyeball it to where the teeth are actually lined up. That'll make it easier when we go to put this section together. And now we're just going to alternate back and forth until the stack is complete. Looks like I've got most of the teeth aligned well enough. Now we can drop this back in. Now with that set in place, let's go ahead and get it and that oil tray back in position. There we go. She's all the way down. Now our washer, and we'll just put this bolt on hand tight. Take note of where your threads are when it comes time to bring the plate up. Get our springs in place. This is where gravity's not really your friend. It may be easier just to put the machine on its side to do this, but we will work it out. We'll get all three of them started and then make sure all of our springs are sitting like they're supposed to. Now as we're bringing these back in, do them 2 or 3 turns at a time, going from one to the other. Alright, looks like everybody's bottomed out now. Now we're going to grab our torque wrench and set these to 9 foot-pounds. That's it. Alright, those 2 10mm that are holding that little oil tray, get them back in. Now we're going to switch gears and turn our attention to the oil pump, because now would be the perfect time to go ahead and get it swapped out. Now the reason we're doing this is because we want more oil flow. With this modification, it increases the amount of pressure, hence more oil gets circulated more often inside the engine. Now there are other kits that are available, but the amount of modifications that I'm doing to it, it should make a really safe and reliable machine without having to go any further. There it is. Both the dowels stayed in the casing. So now all we need to do is take off the circlip, disassemble this, and then actually reassemble it using the same circlip with our new housing and internals. There's our plate. It may not tell you in the manual to do this, but I believe if it's an exposed bolt, especially like this on the inside of an engine, I'm going to put Loctite on it. Alright, now put your pin through your gear. I'll put the shaft through once you get it aligned properly. There she goes. Then just get our E-clip back in. I think I can do this without piercing myself. There she goes. That should do it. Now let's just bolt it back in place. A little bit more Loctite. Then we'll take each one of these to 9 foot-pounds. Be careful when you're doing this. Make sure that your teeth are aligned on the gears. Otherwise you could snap them as you're pushing it back in. Now, if this is the first time you've been into your engine and you've got some miles on it, now is a good time to clean out this little strainer right here. I expected mine to be perfect because, like I said, this thing had 2 miles on it when we rolled it in the shop. But if yours has a few on it, now's the time to check that and go and get it cleaned out. Now, the other aspect that you need to look at is this centrifugal oil filter, or spinner. I think that's what it's commonly called. It has a little bit of trash in it. Chances are that yours probably has a lot. So now's the time to go ahead and get this cleaned out. Okay, before we get the spinner put back on, let's go ahead and torque that main bolt going to our clutch basket. Both of these nuts actually go to 47 foot-pounds. At this point, we can go ahead and put our bearing back in. make sure that the lettering is facing out. There we go. Next, let's put the spinner back on, its washer, and then this nut. Get our holder in place. There we go. We're getting close now, guys. Now this is one gasket I did not reorder, but actually this one looks to be in good shape, so we're going to go ahead and pop it back on. Roughly parallel with the ground. Now I know these had Loctite on them when we took them apart, so they're definitely getting Loctite to go back together. Use our holder one more time. Our dowels are in place. Let's go ahead and get our new gasket up. Stay. All these bolts are the same lengths, so just don't forget these little brackets, and we'll do that one last with the clutch cable on it so we can get the cable back. There we go. Now let's put 9 foot-pounds on all of those. Let's get that last one. There we go. Next, let's bring our brake pedal back up into position. Well, all right, guys, the only thing I have to do next is just fill it up with oil. But seeing how I'm going to go into this engine a little bit further, I'm not going to do that at this time. For now, we're just going to turn our attention to some of the controls and making the machine look a little bit sleeker. We're going to get rid of those really large turn signals and go with a set of units from Coso North. Then we're going to turn our attention to those big mirrors on the handlebars. They're going to come off, and we're going to put on a set of bar end mirrors from Driven Racing. And to finish it off, we're going to change the hand controls, your brake and your clutch, with a set from CRG Group. So now that we've got our parts together, let's head over and see if we can knock this out. So let's start on the rear turn signals. Most of this is going to be plug and play, so not a whole lot of special tools going to be required. We'll get the seat out of the way. If you were watching when we did the Fender Eliminator kit, you know that all the wires are routed up through the middle and then went back to the factory connections. Well, we're just going to unplug those, replace our lights, and get them plugged back in. The stock bolts are 14 millimeters. Now here's where you need to pay a little bit of attention, because the new ones are actually not color-coded as the ones we took off. So you need to remember to carry the right one over to the light blue and the left one over to the orange. Feed our wire through the bracket, then through a washer and that nut that's going to hold it in place. The Coso lights have different size bolts from stock. The stock one's 14. These are 12 millimeter. So we don't get confused later, let's go ahead and plug this one in. Of course, your black is going to go to your ground, which on a Honda is the green. We're going to carry the red over to which side? Orange. One side down, one to go. This is identical to the other side. We only have one place left to plug it in. Like I said, this is going to be really simple. The only tricky part is going to be when we head up front and we go to pull the full headlight assembly off and get to that relay. Get that zip tie back together and we'll tuck it up under the corner. With that done, let's pop the seat back on and then attach the front. It just doesn't look right, does it? Give me a minute, I think I can fix this. All right, now that's more like it. Let's get the front done. So let's start by removing these 4 5mm hex bolts. And when we get under here, what we're going to find, other than the wiring, is the relay is going to be somewhere in here on the back side of that plastic. Now you just want to lift out to get it out of the indentions. And there she comes. All right, what we're going to do is just disconnect it from the main harness, because everything we're about to do is right here. We're going to replace, of course, the turn signals, and there's your relay that we're going to end up swapping out. Let's take this over to the teardown bench, lay it on something soft, and get it taken apart. we want to remove these outer sections, and we're going to start by getting this 8mm, I guess you call it a leveling adjustment screw out, or bolt. Then this little plastic rivet, and you release it just by pushing it in the middle, and then it'll pop out. Now with those out, is just separate it right here, like so. And then what you're going to do is right here, this arm goes up, and then you can pull it through. Now you can rotate it to get this part up above the plastic. There she goes. Disconnect your blinker wire. One down, one to go. Pops right out. Now we can get those removed. One last piece to get out. One down, one to go. Simple stuff here that'll make a big difference in the looks of the machine. So they're already broken down. Let's go grab the new ones and get those installed. Pretty simple to do. Just put this adapter plate on the outside, feed it through, then you have an inner plate, then a washer, then the nut. Just put your wires through one at a time. Now we just need to reach in there with a 12mm and get it tightened down. One down, one to go. Same procedure. Now if you're going to use these lights, make sure that you order this little mount kit. Otherwise, this is going to be really tough to do without it. So now is where the soldering iron comes out, because we've got square peg, round hole. Now there's a couple of different companies that make adapters where you can just plug and play. Well, I have no intention on reusing this, and this is actually a 3-wire plug. So we're going to cut this and then just solder it together and then heat shrink it. And it should look pretty good when I'm done. That's much longer than we need. So we're going to cut it back. Now, I said earlier that this was a 3-wire system. We're actually only going to be using 2, and the 2 are after are the green and the orange. And your green is going to be your negative. The orange with the white stripe we will not be using, because that's the running lights, and this is a single bolt system. So the way we're going to do this to where we don't have a big section there is we're going to cut one back on either side, so where the connections are not made at the same point. So the way that's going to line up is like this. And here's what most people forget, to put the shrink tube on before they solder. Now let's make a few connections. The way I typically do this is just wrap them around once. Get this tinned up. That's all she takes. Now aim away from that long piece because we don't want to shrink it yet, but let's get these 2 smaller ones done. I'll bring this one up. There you are. One down, one more to go. Now let's see if we can get this put back together. Then we'll turn our attention to that relay, because this relay is not going to work with just a regular 12-volt bulb, which is what we took off. What we're actually installing, of course, is LEDs, so it has a different resistance, and we have to take that into account by swapping out the relay. Get our pin back in. This time we're just going to push it flush, like that, and set our adjuster back to 0, which was that line that you see right here. Now all we have to do is plug it up. That should do. Next, we just need to turn our attention to the relay. And we're going to use spades to make the connection into the harness. And then we're going to have to put an eyelet and make a ground for it. Big believer in heat shrink, aren't I? That comes from working on boats for too long. So we're going to use that as our ground. Now I just need to see what size connector I need. That should do it. So we've got our eyelet on. Last thing we need to do is make the connections into the harness to the relay. And I guess you call it your signal wire, goes to the gray on a Grom. And this is kind of counterintuitive, but the 12 volts is actually over on the black wire with the silver marking on it. So let's see if we can tuck this down here. I think that'll work. Go make our ground, get it mounted, and test it real quick. So we can connect up our main harness. Pull that back over. Our headlight. It looks like she's ready to go up now. Now, before we put those bolts back in for the headlight assembly and turn signals, let's test it real quick. Key on. There's our right, off, and left. Success! Now, let's do something about these mirrors. I'll tell you what, let's go one step further. Let's go ahead and get the mirrors and the levers off. Since we are going to go with bar end mirrors, that means we're going to have a threaded hole left. I think I'm going to head to the hardware store here in a little bit, see if I can find something that matches up so we can plug that off, maybe with a button top, give it a finished look. Now let's go ahead and get our clutch. There's a 10mm on the bottom and then a flat blade up top. So we'll break the 10 loose because that basically just locks it in place. Then we can unscrew that one. Now for the brake, it's just a 10 up top and below. Now let's go ahead and get our brake on, but before you put it on, go ahead and get some grease and put it inside the pivot point. Otherwise it's going to wear prematurely. And then we'll put some, we're pushing against that cylinder. Oh, that already looks so much better. The cool part with these is they're actually adjustable as to how far out you have to reach by just moving this top section all the way out, or if you just want a short pull right there. All right, let's go get the clutch. Same scenario on the pivot bolt. Grab your cable, go ahead and get it in. Now bring it around. See if we can do this without having to loosen up the main connector downstairs. Yeah, no problem. Put our 10 on the bottom, lock it in place. Cool. Look at that. That should do it. All right, now let's get after the mirrors. So all you need to do is, of course, take this off the bar end, put it through, and then just screw it back down. Get it roughly in the position we want it. Now, just need to tighten those down and that'll cinch it down onto the bar end. Be patient doing this, otherwise you run the risk of stripping it. If you have to force it, you're not doing it right. There we go. How about something like that? Now, let's just get the other side done. Now the trick with the throttle side is you're going to need to have a spacer in here, or you have to cut your grip. Well, I don't want to do that, so I'm going to go with the spacer to hold it off the end of the grip. That'll work. Now a word of advice here, once you've got everything where you want it, you may want to go back and remove each one of these screws and put a little bit of Loctite on there and then mount it permanently. Otherwise, these have a history of wanting to back out and loosen up. Well, all right guys, that wraps this part up. Don't forget to check the links in the description for all the parts that we're using on this build. Up next, we're actually focused on making it go faster. And to do that, we're using a kit from Coso North. And we're going to punch this thing out to 170 cc's. And then we're also giving it a 4-valve head. We're also going to be installing a throttle body, a high-flow air filter, and while we're down there, we're going to go ahead and replace the cam chain tensioner so it can deal with the added stress of that 4-valve head. Now, as far as the special tools, this is an involved project, and I will call out any tools or special tools that will be required as we go through this process. So I'm going to go open up my whole toolbox and we're going to dive into this thing. So let's go. We start by taking off the seat and getting the shroud off. We're basically going to de-plastic the whole bike, so we've got full access to all of the engine as well as the intake. Now will be a good time to go ahead and disconnect the negative on the battery. We've got all our plastics off, the oil's been drained, and what we're going to focus on next is getting the air box taken off. Strange little setup they have here. I don't see how you can actually get the air box to pull out without taking off the bracket, so that's what I'm going to do. There she goes. Then drop the exhaust side of the way. Looks like there's just a bolt on either side here, one back here, and of course one's going into the head. Then it should just drop right out. There we go. All of that for an exhaust system. Let's go ahead and take care of our throttle cables. Go ahead and finish this up. Now let's get some of these wires unplugged. Go into the injector, throttle position sensor, and then the fuel in. Simple enough, just push in on that end and she pops right off. Just one more hose. Last bolt. All right, let's bring it around to top dead center, make life a little bit easier. Let's take out the spark plug. I'm going to remove the cam cover. You should just pop right off. There. Gentle persuasion. Get our access cover so we can rotate it over. Let's bring it around to our marks. Coming up. Is this absolutely necessary when you're pulling down an engine? Well, no, it's just I prefer to do it this way. Yep, there she is. I've got my mark here, which is T, and then it's also coinciding with that, so that's on the compression stroke. We'll leave that attached and just take off the bracket. All right, this next part I find perplexing. Let's get under here, get this bolt, and there's going to be a sealing washer with it. Now I know the book says you're supposed to hold this cam gear still with a holder, but I'm going to do it the way I've always done it. Hold the crankshaft still and then pop it loose. I seriously doubt that was enough torque to do any damage. Now let's go ahead and remove our O2 sensor. What I'm hoping is I can take a box end wrench and run it all the way down over the wire. Well, an 18 did it. Not very convincingly. 17 should have gone. I don't know what this little malfunction was there. Now, let's go ahead and get our cap bolts off. These two right here. And we should be able to lift it off if it's going to clear that fender. That's the only thing I'm curious about. We'll do this in a crisscross pattern so it comes up evenly. There we go. I was afraid of that. Now, because mine's in a stand, I'm going to need to remove the fender to get the head to clear. Now, if you're doing this at home, just turn your handlebar. All right, see if it'll clear now. There we go. All right, before we can pull the cylinder, let's get this little cam wheel out. Cam chain, that is. Now we should be able to remove it. Now let's go ahead and get a couple of paper towels, go ahead and fill in around the connector rod because I don't want anything foreign going into the engine. I'd hate to see a circlip go inside there as I'm taking them out. With that safely packed, let's go ahead and get a circlip out. That way we can get our piston off. There she is. Now we're almost done, but we need to pull the side cover, and then we're going to remove the rotor, and then actually that'll get us back to the cam chain tensioner, which we're going to upgrade. So these two panels need to come off. There we go. What I want to do right now, unplug this and put it to the side, instead of just having it hang there. So we've got our cover off. Let's go ahead and get this secondary gear on the starter out of the way so it didn't just fall out. And now we're going to remove our flywheel slash stator. And to do that, you're going to need a special tool, which we actually offer. And the best one out there is actually made for Honda. Get it mounted up, then we can get this thing popped off. Well, that one popped off like it was nothing. And the key is still there, so I think we'll just leave it in that space. Or leave it in place, rather. Now with that out of the way, we can go ahead and install the COSO chain tensioner. And we'll basically be replacing this lower pulley or drive gear as well as this assembly. And we're going to be replacing that little cap on the end of the spring tensioner. Because this one is actually a little bit harder material and it won't wear as fast as the OEM one. So let's go ahead and pull that spring assembly out. Next we're going to go for this bolt right here. It looks like a 12 millimeter, and it is. We're going to actually reuse the bolt and then this little collar when we go install the new one. Now if we tighten this down and it actually doesn't have enough clearance, which doesn't allow this to move, you would add in this second washer with the kit to give you enough clearance. Now if any of you have watched me build engines before, you know I'm a big fan of Loctite. Don't have to get carried away with it, just a little drop. Just gives me peace of mind, especially if it's on the inside. Now we're going to tighten this down to 16 Newton meters, which is basically about 11.8, 12 foot-pounds. There we go. Now let's get that lower 5 millimeter pulley out of the way and get it replaced. No bushing or anything on that. We take this one to 10 Newton meters, which is about 7.5 foot-pounds. All right, now let's just slide it back up in there with our spring and this retaining bolt. And now that bolt gets torqued to 22 Newton meters, which is roughly 16 foot-pounds. Next, let's get our flywheel back on slash rotor, washer, bolts. We're going to put our holder back on. Now we're going to take this to 64 Newton meters. That's 47 foot-pounds. All right, the surfaces look good and clean. I don't see any oil that needs to be wiped off. Go ahead and get our gasket in place over both of our dowels. Let's go ahead and get our gear back in. Let's get her lined back up. Don't forget the spacer on the outside. Now we can get our stator bolted back up. There we go. Remember, you had a couple of wire holders, two on the front, and then there's one in the back that actually has two holes in it. Now it's a low torque value on all these, around 7.5 to 8 foot-pounds. That's all you would need. We'll snug them down first, and then I'll go back and put the torque on them. But usually If you grab the wrench up high enough and just put a little bit of twist on it, that'll be enough. But if you don't trust yourself, use a torque wrench if you want to be sure. That way you know you will have it. Last, let's go ahead and get this base gasket off. See if it's going to make it easy for me. You can tell this engine's brand new. Honda gaskets never come off that clean, ever. So we've got it prepped, and as far as we can take it right now. Before we go any further, we need to check the ring gap. And the way we're going to do that is we're actually going to use some guidelines set forth by Wiseco, because this is a forged piston, and that is what Wiseco specializes in. So I'm going to trust their judgment on this. What we need to do is use one of their charts, and we're actually going to use a high-performance street strip application to determine our top ring and second ring gap. So what you're going to do is take your bore, which in this case is going to be 60 millimeters, actually 60.98, and you're going to divide that by 25.4. You take that number and multiply it in the chart. In this case, it's 0.0045, and that's going to give you the ring gap in inches. Then for the second ring, you do the same multiplication times 0.0055. So now, what we're going to do is take our top ring, and that is signified by just having a single R stamped on it. We're going to place it into the cylinder, and then we're going to square it up using the piston. And we're going to push it about down to where the wrist pin's even with the top of the cylinder. Now with that in place, I'm going to get out our feeler gauges and see what fits. Now what we're aiming for is a clearance of 0.011. That's what we're after. So let's get out the 0.011 and see if it goes. I'm going to tell you that's not. No. So we need to determine, well, where is it? So let's drop down to 0.008 or 8 thousandths. Okay, it goes in, but ever so slightly. If I move it at all either direction, it binds up. But if you put it in perpendicular, it goes in. And I'm betting the 9 thousandths will not go. It will, but it basically drug through. Let's look at 10 thousandths. No. So it's close, but we need to file that down just a little bit, and to do that, I'm going to use a ring gap filer. Now granted, we don't have to take off much, but if we did not take off any, as the engine heated up, those rings are going to get closer and closer together, and if they actually touch, well then it's going to start destroying your cylinder wall as well as the ring. So yes, I'm going to take the time to take off just a little bit on that edge with the filer. And when I'm done, I'll actually come back with just a hand file and take off the burrs that are created when we're removing material. So we're going to put this into our filer, and this does not take a lot of pressure to do. You just want to make very certain that you're filing it at a perpendicular angle to the ring itself. So it's in place. Like I said, this will not take long for it to do. Now we're just going to take a fine file and just take off that bottom edge, the front edge, and the back edge. Okay, that got it. Now let's pop it back in. Square it up. Go for that 10. Still a little tight, so let's do a little bit more. We were so close to the edge, I'm flipping the ring over since it's so small, and we'll go from this side. Now, we're still machining that same edge where the R was. I'm just doing it upside down. Take your time doing this, otherwise if you go too far you'll end up having to order another set of rings. But it is better to have a little bit too large of a gap than not enough. Let's go for that 10. 11, but just barely. And I'm good with it going to 12 thousandths. That would actually make me happier. Just barely, and it's actually grabbing as it goes through. So I'm good with that. Now your second ring, it's a little bit more of a gap. We're actually looking for 13 thousandths with it. That's just my eyeballs, but that looks like it's pretty much dead on. Let's see. Yep, 13 goes, 14. So she's already in the ballpark. Let's see where it ends up. 15 goes, but it's starting to catch. So there's nothing we need to do to the second one. It is good to go. Then use a little bit of contact cleaner to finish it off. There. So the name of the game here is to keep things clean. And just for fun, look at the difference in between 125 cc's and 170. Pretty dramatic difference. Now since we're over here in a clean mode, let's go ahead and get a little bit of contact cleaner and clean up the cylinder. Just because it came out of the box doesn't mean it's completely clean. Not bad, but still worth doing. Now let's talk about ring placement. The way I usually do this is to actually mark the top of the piston, where the top, the second, and then the O-rings are configured. And we're going to follow the guidelines set forth by COSO. Because I guarantee you, once I actually get the rings installed here on the table, by the time it makes it over to the machine and gets connected to the connector rod, they're going to move around. So this will make it easy for me to go there, line them up, and then get the cylinder installed. Now following the guidelines from COSO, we want our top ring to be right here. And the way I've got it oriented, you'll notice that this arrow is pointing toward me, which is actually toward the exhaust side. And that's also easy to identify because the intake valves are much larger than the exhaust. So your bigger dish cutouts are going to be on the intake side. So we've got our top one there. Then we're going to put the second one roughly 45 degrees in that direction. Then you're going to look at your first oil ring. It's going to be here. Bottom oil ring will actually go here, and then the expansion ring goes in line with your second ring. So that's going to be the configuration when we're done. So now we're going to put on our expansion ring first. Remember I said it was going to end up over on this side. Now this one is not too tough, and you can pretty much just spiral it on without damaging it, like that. Now when you're doing this, you want to look in there and make sure the ends are actually going into each other like this. If they manage to lap over, then we're going to have an issue. I usually hold one end with one side, then pull it back just to verify that they're not overlapped. There. Now, let's do our bottom. These you want to be careful with and only open them up far enough to clear the piston. And we need to hold the expansion ring still and bring the end over just a tick. There. Now we want our second end to end up right there. There it goes. Teeny tiny. There's one end, there's the other end, looking good. Now we can put our second on right here, and you want to make sure that that R mark I was talking about, or in this case the RN, is facing up. Now for this one, we just want to dab a little bit of oil and carry it around the surface of the ring. You don't have to glob it on, just wipe it all the way around. These you don't want to spiral on. You just want to pull it out evenly to clear the piston without gouging it, and then drop it in. Same thing for the top. Make sure your R is facing up, light coating of oil, And we want it to end up right here. There. Now when we go to put it together, it'll be facing in there like this. So we'll go ahead and put the opposite side circlip in. And either want it facing up or down. You do not want either one of these ends to go into this relief right here, which you would use to actually pull it out. So put it in the channel, and then we're going to walk it in with our fingernails. Now if you need to use a little bit of coaxing with the screwdriver, just be careful while you're doing it. Like that. She's facing right here. So we're good to go. Now we'll go ahead and prep our wrist pin. To do that, we're going to get some assembly lube, make a mess of it, and go just a light coating on the inside where the wrist pin is going to go. A little bit on the pin itself. And now we can at least start it right there. Now let's go ahead and prep our cylinder. And all we're going to do for it, make sure your hands are clean, is just take a little bit of oil and put it around the barrel. Now we're only putting a very light coat of oil in here because on first startup, yes, we need lubrication, but we also want the rings to actually cut into the cylinder, and that's what these hone marks are for. Because if that doesn't happen, if it's too slippery in there, they're not going to cut in, then they're not going to seal properly. So that's very important on startup. Well, now that we've got our piston, our wrist pin, and our cylinder prepped, let's go get on that gasket and get this put together. So let's get that piston put on the end of the connector rod. Once again, make sure that arrow is pointing down to your exhaust. Now let's get our second circlip, our snap ring, installed. Close quarters in here. That was it. Now we can go ahead and remove our little towels. Surface is clean. Let's get our gasket on. You'll know if you've got this on right or wrong because this hole has to go down here with this oil inlet. Carry our chain over. Get her seated down. All right, now is where we need to look at our rings to make sure they haven't moved and then adjust them as necessary. That looks good. That looks good. Now with all that in place, let's go ahead and get this new cylinder on there. Name of the game is patience here. Bring it up. And just squeeze the rings as you're bringing it in. There you go. Grab our chain. Go ahead and bring it through. Well, there she is. Next, let's go ahead and get our timing chain. Let's call it mid-wheel, if you want to call it that. Get it back in place. Now, you haven't already. We do need to pull our dowels out of the other cylinder slash head because we're going to be reusing those. Now, get on our head gasket. You'll know you've got it on right because the tab will be going up. Plus, it actually has larger holes for the dowels. The next part, let's go ahead and get the head mounted up and get it torqued down. So the surfaces are clean. We've got our gasket in place. Let's lift our chain through. And down she goes. Now to get an accurate torque on the anodized bolts or caps, we want to actually put a little layer of grease on the bottom of it. That way it has a smoother, less resistive surface to ride against, so we get a more accurate actual torque value as we're bringing it in. So I'm just applying a little layer of grease just around the bottom edge where it's going to come into contact with their brass washers. And we're actually going to torque these to the stock value. Go ahead and get these in place. Then we're going to torque each one to 18 foot-pounds. That's it. Next, let's go ahead and get these two 8mm headphones back in. Now, let's focus on our timing. Now, we should be really close to top dead center. Now, she's right on it. What we're going to do is use this just to hold it still. So we just want it to rest there. Let's grab our cam gear. See if we can pop it in there. That's it. Now normally here's the part where I have to take it off several times and walk it back, one or two teeth, but actually I hit it the first time. I'll try not to let it go to my head. Now let's go ahead and get the cam gear bolt back in before it decides to change its mind and jump off. And now we're going to take this bolt to 20 foot-pounds. Now they make a holder to hold this gear, but I'm just going to use the timing chain carefully and just hold the crankshaft still. There we go. 20 pounds is not a lot, so I don't think I was stressing the timing chain too much by doing it that way. Now that allowed the crankshaft to turn just a tick. We want to bring it back up to top dead center so we can adjust the valves. What we're looking for here is 4 thousandths on the intake side and then 7 thousandths on the exhaust. That's in inches. Make this process a little bit easier, we're using a little tool from Motion Pro for doing valve adjustments. But on this particular engine, your actual wrench that tightens down the lock nut is a little too big, so we're going to have to do it without it. We'll just get a 8mm and just hold that in place. What we're going to do is bring it down till it grabs it, then ever so slightly back it off. Do you just want to feel a little bit of stiction where you can feel it tugging against it just a little, but it still allows you to move it in and out. So right there. We're going to hold the adjuster still and then use our little wrench to tighten it down. Now just hit the other side. Right there. Lock it in place. Now for the exhaust, we're looking for 7 thousandths in inches. But same procedure. Now we go and get those valve covers on. All right, these have a little arrow pointing up, so might want to pay attention to that. All right, let's get our cam cover on. I thought it was going to look funny black, but actually it kind of looks okay. Now that we're finished with the timing, let's go ahead and get our inspection caps back on. Just make sure you're not missing the O-rings. There's a couple of things we need to transfer over. One is this temp sensor. Bring a harness down. Plug that back in. Then get this bracket back on. Just to make sure that everything's playing nicely together, we want to rotate it over just a couple of times and make sure there's no interference anywhere. I mean, I feel confident that everything's good, but this will definitely tell us. There's one. And there's two. Yep. Already trying to build some compression in there. So we're good to go. Let's get this inspection plug back in place. All right, guys, the next step in the process, as you can tell, is the intake. Now, I've got everything laid out, including that high-flow injector, along with the high-flow air filter. Now, all of that is going to get funneled out through a new exhaust system. So the goal here over at the teardown bench is to make this resemble what came off. So we're going to start off by transferring over the idle air control valve as well as the throttle position switch. All right, they are held in place with Torx screws, and it's a T25. So we'll start off with our throttle position sensor. See if we can gently pry up on this. There we go. Then just transfer it over. It just bolts back in place. Now, there is no adjustment on this one. I've seen on other units like TRX 420 where this is actually slotted and you have to dial it in by taking a resistance measurement. Evidently on the Grom, that is not the case. One location, period. Now, since we're over on this side, let's go ahead and grab the air fuel or the idle fuel mixture screw. Now we're just going to transfer that in. We're going to lightly bottom it out and then back it back out 2 turns. All right, it's bottomed. 1, 2. Next, let's go for the idle air control valve. And that was a T25 as well. Now, who would have thought so many years ago, a simple little mini bike would have all this complicated stuff on it now. Guess I'm really showing my age, huh? Well, the basic design of a mini bike, when you think back to a QA50, it just had a simple carburetor on it, and now here we are, fuel injected and throttle position sensors and everything else of a modern machine. Now let's go ahead and mount the throttle body to the actual intake. Get our O-ring. I'm just going to sit in like this. And we're just reusing the 2 8mm head bolts that came out of the OEM. The original, that is. Now, I believe we need to get that bracket over here. And compare these two. Tell me that ain't going to be pulling some more air. Big difference. Now all these pieces, when they all come together, it's going to be nice. We're going to go ahead and put this little spacer in place. Now you've got these 3 threaded areas here, and if you have the stock injector going back in, you just use those 2. But ours is just going to use the single one in the middle. Now let's get our adapter kit and get our high flow injector in there. Now, one note, with this particular setup on the 2018, the input was going to interfere with the plug going to the idle air control valve, so I just heated it up a little bit and bent it up enough to clear it. Wasn't in the instruction book, but that was my way around it. Now let's work on our injector. Now this one actually has an O-ring around the bottom, so you will not be using this other rubber O-ring, if you want to call it that, because that is actually made for the stock setup or the stock injector. Now we need to set up our adapter on top of our injector. That goes in there, and then this little clip slides in to hold it in place. Now we'll take this assembly and push it into the intake, and you should hear a click once that O-ring seats properly. Yep. Now, put in this other 5mm hex, and it'll hold the injector in place. Now, if you're looking at it from the side, what I did was modify this angle, because before it was just sitting straight, and there's no way that plug would have been able to clear. So just bend it up a little bit. That should give us enough clearance. We've pretty much got it together. Now what we need to do is adapt this down. So you've got this length of hose and then this brass adapter. Now let's wrangle this hose onto the end of that adapter. What I'm doing here is just pre-stretching it a little bit so they don't give us much room, because this is actually too large compared to the one that came off. Well, that is some type of tight fit there. So we just need to get the clamps on, then it'll be ready to install. The chances of this actually blowing off are almost zero without the clamp, but we'll go ahead and put it on there anyway. So I think it's got right at 48 psi from the fuel pump in the tank. Last but not least, we have an adapter to go on our injector. All right, let's get it bolted up to the machine. The arrangement they have here is gasket, spacer, then another gasket, and then the intake itself. So you just sandwich them together like this. Stay. This all goes together using the bolts that we're holding it down to begin with. When you're doing this other side, don't forget your little bracket that's going to hold the air box in place. Yeah, that forward bolt that was in place doesn't want to go now, so we had to put in a shorter one. Let's make a few connections now. Throttle position, intake air, fuel injector. There we go. Now we can go into our fuel line. Just push in and that should let it go through. Oops. Made a little boo-boo, guys. I actually put the adapter in backwards. So we're going to need to remove it from the hose, flip it around, and then reinstall it. Through the magic of editing, this just got spun around and reinstalled like it's supposed to be. Now, there we go. We're going to add in a zip tie just to hold it in place up top along that frame spar and harness. All right, guys, so we've got our intake mounted, we've got our new injector, our new throttle body. It's ready to go. So let me go grab the exhaust and we'll get started on that. Let's start off by installing our studs for the exhaust manifold, and the best way I know to do that is to take a couple of nuts and just have them face each other, lock them down, and then you can drive it in. So let's get this little plumbing puzzle put together. Let's take your header and go ahead and put it into the mid pipe like this. And they want you to use this bolt with this washer, and it's supposed to go through here and then go into this existing pickup point where the other exhaust was mounted. That is not going to make it. So that is a little too short. I'd say by about 10 millimeters. So I'm going with a little bit longer bolt. This is theirs versus mine, so it can bridge that distance. Hopefully you have one of these in your extra bolt pile, as I do. And at this point, put your exhaust gasket in place. Now we're going to lift it up. Now you want to use the bolts that came off the stock exhaust system. So we've got it loosely in place. I'm going to jump over on the other side and stretch this spring in between the head pipe and the midsection. Now we're going to put on the actual muffler, and because we are using a different foot peg set from Driven Racing, we have to adapt it a little bit to get it to fit, because we're actually going to be a little bit short when it comes to coming out to the mount for the muffler itself. So I'm just adding in a spacer to accomplish that, and then I bought a longer bolt to go all the way through. Just when you start modifying things, this is what you run into, and you just have to figure out a way around it. Welcome to the world of modifications. I think that'll do. Plenty of clearance in between the swing arm, this bolt, and the muffler itself. So now I think we can start to actually tighten everything down. Let's start up at the head pipe first, get it snug down. After you've run the bike for a while, you may need to come back and retighten these. As the head and the exhaust gasket expand and contract, it may develop a little bit of a leak and just needs to be tightened back down so it doesn't burn through the actual gasket that's up inside. Now let's get that mid mount. Last but not least, the rear. And we have one more spring to install. It's not as if this is going to jump apart, but we want to go ahead and install the spring. Now there's one thing left to do. All this nice clean stainless steel has not been heated up yet, but there's fingerprints all over it. So if we run it right now without cleaning it, those fingerprints are going to actually get embedded and turn up being blue, and we don't want that. So we're going to get some contact cleaner and a towel and wipe those down to where it is going to be ready for the first start. So now let's turn our attention to installing the airbox and the new filter. With a larger throttle body, we of course have to adjust to it going from the airbox that we're going to use. So we're going to have to modify our existing airbox to get the new tube into it. As you can see, it's much larger. So let's get this taken apart, get the old tubes pulled out, then using a Dremel tool, a burr tool, I'm going to enlarge them to where they fit correctly. Just for kicks. Look at your surface area, one compared to the other. I believe that's going to flow a little bit more air, which this machine is going to need. So let's start by getting this tube extension out of the way. And of course that's melted in place, so I'll tell you what, we'll just grind that off, then that should release it. If you decide to grind like I did, just make sure you get all of the shavings out. We don't want to pull that into the engine. So we don't damage the intake air temperature while we're doing all this. Let's go ahead and remove it and put it to the side, and then we'll work on breaking that glue loose. Not going to be that tough. No glue on the second one. Now all we have to do is make both of these fit there and there. Now what they call for is this opening to be 40.5 millimeters. What I'm going to do is use my caliper to find a socket with a diameter really close to that. A 30 millimeter socket is right at 40 millimeters. So that's going to be as close as I can probably get. So what we'll do is lay it there, scribe it with a sharp point, and then hand cut it. This doesn't have to be absolutely exact. Let's do a test fit and see what we've got. I'm liking that. Pretty sure I've got it upside down, but fortunately I took a picture before I removed the other one so I can get it back at the same angle. Now for the 50 millimeter, we're actually going to look at a 36. It is 50.1. Winner. Let me do a little housekeeping, and then we'll get going. All right, according to my phone, this one needs to sit about right here, and then the intake is about right there. The final say-so is we'll hold it up to the machine and see if it correlates. So now that we've got it pointed in the right direction, what I'm going to go back and do now is push in on it all the way around and little by little get in some RTV sealant just to make sure we've got this sealed up properly, because that's the most important one. Very important that we keep any other particles from making it past where these two join together, because that goes straight into the engine. I think that'll do. Let's get our intake air temperature back in. Now, COSO sends two different foam filters that can be used inside of the air cleaner adapter. I'm going to go with the tighter one, the one that's going to be more aggressive as far as filtering everything out. But before we install it, I'm actually going to open it up and put a light coating of oil on the foam. The combination of the foam with a little bit of oil, that will block out the majority of dust and particulates that are trying to get in. Going to use a little bit of PJ1 foam filter oil, and I want it on the side that the air is going to draw through, because I don't want to overcoat it. That should do. Not absolutely necessary, but too many years on a motocross track makes me very leery of not oiling a filter before you put it in. Now we're going to use the longer screws that COSO sent to mount the outside cover back on. All right, let's see if we can wrangle this back on there. Go ahead and loosen this stuff back up and dip it down enough to where we can get it in there. There she is. Now let's go ahead and get that clamp loosened up and get it over the intake on the throttle body. Make sure it's on there evenly. That should do it. Go grab our upper bolts and go ahead and get the top of the airbox mounted. Just a 10mm on either side. All right, let's work on those throttle cables next. So what you want to do is put in your return side first and just tighten it all the way down. And then when you're doing the pull side, you want just a little bit of slack that you have to bring in before it starts to open up. So just a little bit of slack just right here, and then tighten it down. And make sure that it opens all the way up on its own. Yep. That's against the stop. That's set. Let's go ahead and get our cover back on. We need to get the tank breather line routed back where it started. And then we have the crankcase vent line that actually goes into the backside of the airbox. All right, guys, before I do my typical outro, I need to show you a change I decided to make on the intake system. Once everything had been put back together, I'd never addressed the evap canister and the purge control valve. Now, there's a lot of people out there that just take the system and bypass it. Well, that's not the way I wanted to do it. I wanted to just modify and enhance the engineering that came from Honda and not eliminate anything. So what I decided to do was actually cut into the factory intake far enough to where I could remove that brass nipple vacuum. Then there's a location on the COSO unit where you can see, well, that's where it should be. So I drilled it out, transferred it over to the new unit, and then put it back together. Well, all right, guys, that's pretty much going to wrap up all the engine modifications. Up next, we're going to focus on the suspension. Now, the parts we're going to use is actually two separate part numbers. You've got one that's the complete fork dampener, and it's going to have your compression and your rebound side, along with all the other pieces that you're going to need to get it swapped out on a stock slider and tube. Now, the other piece we're going to be using is a rear shock from Öhlins. It is actually completely adjustable, compression and rebound adjustments on it. Really a nice unit, and it's going to make a huge difference on how this machine handles. Just to give you an overview of what we're about to do. Now, granted, this one's already broken down a pretty good bit, so if you're doing this from the start, you would end up having to remove your seat in the rear tail section. And once you get that out of the way, we're going to have to go a little bit further. There is a lock mount that I need to remove on this side, and then I need to remove, quote, quote, the rear lower fender. Once I get that out of the way, I'll bring over a floor jack, support the machine from the middle, and then we can remove the 2 bolts and then pop it in there. I figured we'd start on the easy end first, and then we'll deal with the forks later in the day. Let's start with this lower fender first. This has got a few 5mm bolts going through it. The real trick is the other side. I don't think there's enough room to get around the exhaust, so we may end up having to pull off the muffler, and then we'll get this lifted out of the way. Oh, grab our spring. So what we'll do is loosen up this and then get the muffler to shift up out of the way. All right, where the seat release lock is, there's a bracket screw here, then one up top. They're both Phillips. That should swing out of the way enough for us to get to that top bolt for the shock. There we go. So now we can get to both of them. Let's go ahead and get the jack under there and just support it so it doesn't collapse when we drop them out. That should do it. What you have is a 14 on the bolt side and a 17 on the nut side. And it looks like it's the same thing down low. Let's see if we can pop it loose without having to hold the other side just yet. Yep, look at there. There's one. There's 2. Look at your difference here, kids. Completely adjustable, spring rate, compression, rebound, absolutely non-adjustable. All right, let's get it back together. Now we're actually going to put this in upside down so it'll actually clear. Now if this bothers you and you don't want to install it, upside down, they do make one, they being Olin's, to where it is a remote reservoir, but the reservoir ends up sticking out on the side. I have no problem with installing one of these things upside down, so that's what I'm going to do. There we go. Done with that for now. We used the original nuts and bolts that came out of this, and we're going to take it back to the factory spec of 34 foot-pounds for both the bottom one and the top. All right, so the only thing we need to do now is go ahead and remount this holder for the lock switch and then get that lower rear fender remounted. Then reinstall the muffler, and then we get to do the fun part, the front forks. Okay, so the easy part's over with. Let's really dive into those forks now. So what I'm going to do next is take the bike off, spin it around, support the front end, and pull those forks, and then we're going to dive into them. So we're getting ready to drop out the front tire, the caliper, and then we're going to drop out the forks. But before we do any of that, let's go ahead and loosen up our top caps, because they're going to be really hard to hold still, and the clamps are actually doing a great job of that right now, so let's take advantage of that and at least go ahead and break them loose. What I'm doing now is removing the handlebars, because yes, I could grab a large wrench and break those loose, but when I go to put it back together, well, guess what? I've got to torque it back to spec, and you won't be able to do that with a wrench. So we're going to go ahead and drop down our handlebars where we've got easy access to these fork caps. Now, if you want to make sure you get your handlebars back in exactly the right position, go ahead and make a couple of marks and make it easier to line back up when you go to reinstall them. There we go. That'll give us plenty of room to get around there. And these are both 36. All right, good enough. Now let's get that front tire and the caliper off. This one is an ABS unit, so you need to disconnect the speed sensor wire as well. Be careful with it, as they are easily damaged. Also looks like they had red Loctite in there as well, so we'll be adding that back in when we go to reinstall it. A couple of 12s on our caliper. There she goes. Loctite on those too. Next, let's get our axle bolts out. We should be able to loosen up the clamps. There we go. All right, we've got the right one out. Let's head over to the tear down table and start pulling this thing apart. So I've got it clamped down in our vise, just have a little towel there to keep it from scratching it up. It doesn't have to be super tight because we're just removing this cap, which is already loosened. And when you're doing this, you want to make sure that your table is clean. All the surfaces you're going to be working on are clean, because you do not want to get any foreign contaminants inside of your forks. All right, next, we're going to grab that and then remove our cap. Whenever I'm taking one of these apart, I just lay them out in order. That way I won't spend so much time running back and forth to the diagram. Now let's go ahead and dump out the oil and pump it out. When you're doing this, you do not want to pull all the way out on the lower fork tube, because we actually are going to leave this together. There's no real reason for us to pull the seals out, because that's not what we're after. We're going to let it hang here and finish draining. While it's doing that, I'm going to go ahead and remove the other fork and just lay it to the side. Hopefully this thing will be through, and then we'll continue taking it apart. Right, Öhlins makes a special tool to hold this, and what you're basically doing is creating a clamp, and it's actually putting a protrusion inside of one of these holes to hold it still. Well, I didn't buy that tool. What I did do is I already had a 31mm seal driver. All I did was just drill a hole in it and then put an 8mm pin through it. Now there is a little bit of a rough edge on this tool, so what we're going to do is wrap it with a piece of paper, because we're not actually clamping down on the tube. We're just holding this pin into one of those holes. That's all we're trying to accomplish. And when I place it up in there, I'll drop it down, put it in the vise, and that should hold it still. Now, just so all that doesn't fall apart, I'm actually going to tape it together. One modified special tool. That should do. Now the fun begins. I'm going to go grab a heat gun, bring this up to around 200 degrees, and what we're trying to do is break down the Loctite that's inside of this particular connection. But here's the real important part. This is a reverse thread, so we're actually going to turn this clockwise to loosen it. So 185, 184. Let's give it a shot. Yeah, resist the temptation to just grab this with your bare hands. You won't be happy. Keep in mind that tube's going to be pretty hot as well. While all that Loctite is still warm, let's go ahead and wipe it out of the bottom part. Ooh, still warm. All right, next, let's go ahead and get this end cap off, and this is a 14mm. All right, these last couple of threads, you want to get your hand near it, because the spring's going to try to kick it out, and the washer. Not a lot of pressure, but just be ready for it. There we go. Cap our washer. All right, let's go ahead and get this out of the clamp so we can get the dampening rod out of it. That worked well. There we go. That's what we were after. So we've got everything fully disassembled now, but there are a couple of pieces that we need to take off the stock dampener rod and transfer them over to the new one from Öhlins. Now the one we're going to start with is going to be the rebound side. And you can tell we're on the rebound side because this little ring right here, this is actually called a piston ring, and the flat side is forced up against this end of the dampener. And we're actually going to take it off and transfer it over to our rebound side of our new Öhlins part. And you know this is the rebound side, one, because it was marked inside the packaging, and plus I put an R on it. But if you took it out of the packaging and you got mixed up as to which one's which, you can tell because your spring is on the bottom side of this holder. So to take off this piston ring, we just want to carefully expand it just enough to get off of the old dampener rod, and then we're going to reinstall it onto the Öhlins piece. The other piece that we're going to transfer over is this return spring, and that is all we will need off of this particular piece. So let's put this dampener rod back into our fork tube. Next, we're going to put in the springs, and I've decided to go with the heavier of the two. They send it with a 5.5 and a 6. We're going to go with the 6.0. Okay, at this point, we need to reattach our tool and then clamp it back in the vise. Critical that you get this lined up correctly. All right, once again, let's tape these two halves together so they don't fall off as we get it in the vise. So now we put in a couple of new pieces. We have a washer and a spacer that came with the kit. And now we reinstall the bottom cap, make sure there's some oil or either grease on this O-ring as we put this in. And we're going to take this to 40 Newton meters or 29.5 foot-pounds. Now let's take it out of the vise and start working on the other end. Next, let's grab our circlip and get it put in place. See how strong my fingers are here. Now we'll just slide it down and slip it into that groove. There we go. So with our circlip on, we take the Öhlins washer, and you want the chamfered side facing toward the circlip, of course. Then you take the rubber bump that was in the old top cap, insert it into the new Öhlins one, put that in place. Then we'll take the crush washer and the Öhlins bolt, apply a little bit of Loctite, insert it, and then we're going to tighten that to 15 Newton meters. There we go. Next, let's go ahead and get it back into the vise, and then we're going to fill it up with 235 milliliters of fork oil. And I'm actually using some 5-weight from Maxima, but if you wanted to use the Öhlins, we carry that as well, so it's really up to you which one you want to go with. I've always had good luck with this particular brand, so that's what I'm going to go with. And as we're pouring it, you want to work the valve up and down to get air out and fluid in, otherwise it's not going to take it, it'll just spill out the top. So just keep that in mind as you're pouring it in. So let's get a little bit of grease on this O-ring, and then we can put this cap on. Now we won't do our final torque until we actually get it back on the machine, where the machine is actually holding it in the clamps, and that's when it'll get tightened all the way. But right now we just need to seal it back up. Now let's get it out of its vise. And what we're going to do next is get a little bit of Loctite. We're going to run it lightly around the threads, get this on, clamp it into the vise, and then torque it down. Now here's the real trick. Up to this point, I've been using a standard 14. You need to make sure that you have one that extends out at least 2 1/4 to 2.5 inches, which I just happen to have. And guess what? We'll be through with this fork. So here's the only thing that's different from one fork to the other. The compression, you can see that the spring's on the opposite side of this channel, and that is the direction that we want these protrusions to face. So regardless of what you took off as far as the direction of the factory dampening rods, this is the way the Öhlins is set up. You want to make sure it's always pointing, no matter which side you're talking about, toward that little spring right there. If you've got that with the protrusions pointing that direction, you've got it. So let's get these things installed. Be careful bringing them in, not to scratch them. Bring it just maybe 1 millimeter above the edge, right there. We're just gonna snug them down for the time being, then we'll come back and actually set the torque. Each one of the pinch bolts gets torqued to 27 Newton meters or 20 foot-pounds. And then when you're doing these, especially the bottom ones, do one, then the other, and then go back and check that first one. Make sure it's still at the same torque value. And let's go back. See? Had to go back and then bring it a little bit more because that other one had pulled it down and gave it a false reading the first time around. All right, let's jump over and do the other side. Now, with those tightened down, let's hit those top caps. This is going to be 30 Newton meters or 22 foot-pounds. There we go. Let's get our clamps put back together. If you remember correctly at the beginning of this, I made a little small dot to show the correct position. The other dot you need to pay attention to is the top part of the clamp. You want that facing forward, and that is also the end that gets tightened down first. We tighten this one down and then go to the back one. Now we will be taking these back off later when we start working on the air fuel management system, because there's actually going to be an air fuel ratio gauge that's going to get mounted there, a readout for it, but we'll put it back together for the time being. Now just need to get the front tire on, then the caliper, and then the fender, and we're pretty much done with this. And we're going to take that front nut to 40 foot-pounds. There we go. Let's prep our bolts for the brake caliper bracket, and we're also going to put a little dab of red Loctite, and then once we get it on, we're going to take it to 22 foot-pounds. Just pushing our caliper pistons back so it'll be easier to wiggle it on the rotor. Next, let's go ahead and get our speed sensor and that associated cable holder in place. Now let's carefully slide our fender back into place. Well, all right guys, that wraps up the suspension upgrades, but we're not quite finished with it yet, because now all this new equipment needs to be told how to operate and play nice together. So we're going to deal with that next. So what we've chosen to do is use a system from DYNOJET. We're actually using the Power Commander 5, and we're pairing it with the wideband 2, and what that is going to allow it to do, it is going to tune the engine the more the bike gets ridden through a wideband O2 sensor. Now just for kicks, we're adding in a little module from COSO that's going to show the live air-fuel ratio as it's going on. Now there's not going to be a whole lot of special tools here other than a laptop. But now that we've got all of our parts together, let's step over there and get this installed. So we're going to start off with the COSO piece, and it's just a little Mini 3 LCD readout, and what this is going to do is tie into the existing wiring that they're calling a temperature sensor or an O2 sensor that was factory to the bike when it came from Honda. And the mount that I chose actually goes up on the handlebars. So let's get those unbolted, get this bolted down, and then we'll start routing our wires. All right, I'd already made a little dot on the side on the handlebar earlier because I'd had them off doing another procedure, so I can get them back in the factory position once we get the new clamp in place. And then there's just 4 6mm Allens that are holding the clamps in place. Let's see if we can do all this without letting it move. That is a nice looking little setup that COSO has. As with the factory clamps, you want to tighten the front side first. Then we do the back side. Get our caps back on. So with that mounted, we're going to drop the headlight assembly out, and then we're going to tap into an ignition source as well as a ground. I'm just going to hang that out to the side. What we're going to do here is temporarily reconnect the battery and then find a ignition straight off of the main switch. So we're going to tap in directly off the ignition switch to the black wire. And then what I'll actually do here, we're going to cut the black wire on the switch side because I don't want to damage the wiring harness on the actual machine itself. The switch side, okay, if something went wrong there later on, you just replace the switch. Go on with your life. Now if you go back into the harness and make a cut there, well, then you're kind of committed to the entire wiring harness, and that's not what we want to do. So we've got the power brought up for the wideband 2, and we're going to combine that with the power that's going to the COSO display. And we're actually using watertight fittings here, and that'll pretty much negate any chance of corrosion. But if for some reason corrosion did get in there, you'd only have to replace the actual switch harness and not the wiring harness for the entire machine. Now on the ground side, we already had one in position for the relay for the LED turn signals. We're going to actually tap into that same location, just redo it for the ground for the COSO. Now for the wideband, we're actually going to ground it back at the main unit ground instead of bringing it all the way up here. There's no real reason to. Matter of fact, the shorter the ground, the better. So let's get those shrunk down. There we go. Let's remake our harness connection to the ignition switch. Let's focus on the wideband O2 sensor. And now you can leave it connected all the time and it'll constantly make adjustments, but honestly these things will stop up and wear out after X amount of time. I'm going to go ahead and wire it and zip tie it to where it could be removed easily. I'll make one other note. When you're working with this, do not touch the tip. What I think we're going to do is bring this around and just kind of tuck it up on top of the ignition coil and then make our connection there. Now the good part with these is they actually leave the wires free, where you don't have to try to route this huge connector down through the frame. But we really don't have that far to go. Had it not been like this, I'd probably have to remove the tank to get it up through here. There. Now we can bring up the cable with the splitter that's going to go back here and plug into the meter. So we're going to unplug it from the main harness here, plug this into the new splitter, plug back into the main harness, and then send this up front. I think we're going to run those there for the time being. Do our connections in a little bit. We've already got our grounds, both for the regular 12 volt and the digital, brought down to here. And what we're going to do is put another eyelet on and put it at this main harness ground for the actual Grom unit itself. Whenever I'm running wires on a unit, I try to follow the flow as much as I can of the stock wiring harness. Liking that. So the last piece to get in is going to be the Power Commander 5. It's going to set in like this, and it's really simple to hook up. All we're doing is unplugging the ECU over on this side and putting this in line. So let's go ahead and pull this off its bracket, disconnect it, and this will actually connect into here, go back to that same bracket, and this will plug into the harness going to the rest of the machine. Now let's plug these in, see if I've got enough slack to bring the ECU over where it needs to be. I think I've got it. That's as close as you get, but that is it. Now I brought the harness all the way around following the stock harness, but if you wanted to go a shorter route, then you can cut this back. Just make sure you re-tin these wires so they're able to go inside the this little bit of rubber that you have to force through before you can actually get to the terminal. Now I'm pretty pleased with the way all this turned out, all the routing. Now let's get everything bolted back the way it was. So what's going to happen next is we're going to get all the plastics put back on, and at that point I'm going to bring over the laptop where I've already got the Power Commander 5 software installed. We're going to connect to this and show you how to program it. Now once you've got the DYNOJET software installed, you only need a cable to connect into the Power Commander 5. Once you make this connection, your PC will actually power up the Power Commander 5. Then you can go to their site, and they have several maps that are already set up for different combinations of air cleaners and exhaust systems. Well, in our particular application, we've gone far and beyond what they offer in their map selection. So what DYNOJET suggested is to actually just get a map, zero it out, and then go from there with your air fuel targets. Now the real trick with the Grom is, even with the Power Commander 5, it can only adjust from 80 to 100%. And we're going to need a little bit more than that, and that's where the wideband comes in. Once you set your 80 to 100% air-fuel ratio targets, the wideband will actually handle the 0 to 60% throttle response. And they actually want you to use a lambda AFR target. Now, once you've set your target AFRs for your Power Commander 5, there's one other box that you need to tick, and that's to tell it that you've got a wideband 2 connected to it. What the wideband 2 is going to do is handle your AFR targets from 0 to 60% throttle. But remember, they're going to be doing this in lambda. And the way you set that is to use the POD 300. You go in and set the target in lambda, and it will adjust accordingly. Because remember, we reassigned the stock O2 sensor and ran it up to the COSO Mini 3. But we still had that wire that goes to the ECU. Well, it is actually connected to the wideband 2, and that is what it's going to be sending the ECM its signal. So those two working in conjunction will handle your entire throttle position range. Now, once we've set a 0 table and we've told the machine that it's got a wideband 2, we've set the target in lambda for the wideband 2, the next thing we need to do is just go out and ride it. And what you want to do is ride around and use the full throttle range for every single gear. That way it'll get your entire throttle response basically from 5% all the way up to 100. Now, it's taking all those calculations and it's trying to adjust the map to do so, but it will not change the map until you bring it back in, connect it, accept the map, and then send it back into the machine. At that point, it will be running on the new map. Now, the reason that they are wanting you to accept the map and then send it in, because they want you to review it to make sure there's no abnormalities that may have just been a fluke as you were riding around during that particular session. And that gives you a chance to change them firsthand before they get uploaded into the machine. We actually took the machine out for 5 different rides, and each time she got better and better and better. And at this point, we called it quits. We decided to tune this one a little bit on the conservative side and to run on regular 93 octane pump gas. Now, if you want to take it further, that is up to you. But I'd like for this machine to go to its new owner and last a long time. Now, they also make a mount for the POD 300 where you can put it on your handlebars, but honestly, how are you going to really ride the machine and then look at your screen at the same time? I decided not to leave it permanently mounted, but it's a nice way to spot check yourself by plugging it in and then taking a look at what's going on inside that programmer. When you're ready to use the POD 300 programmer, you just use the CAN cable, plug it into either port, and that'll lock it in. But you do have to turn on the key to activate the power to the wideband 2. Listen, we just want to say thank you for shopping here with us at Partzilla. And if you like what you see, why don't you hit that subscribe button? That way you can keep up with whatever I'm working on next. Once again, we just want to say thank you, and we will see you in the next video. Y'all have a great day.